I never thought a single day could change everything. I mean, I've had hard days before, long hours cleaning houses, barely enough to pay for my tiny apartment. But that day felt different. I woke up before sunrise, like I always do, the cold air biting my face as I slipped on my worn shoes. I stared at my reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror, telling myself, "You can do this. Just another day." I packed my small bag with cleaning supplies, grabbed my thermos of weak coffee, and stepped into the quiet streets. The city was still asleep, but I already felt the weight of the day pressing down on me, like it knew something big was coming. The mansion was enormous, like one of those palaces you see on TV. I had worked there for months, cleaning floors until my knees ached, dusting shelves taller than me, and polishing silver that no one would ever notice. I was invisible, just another part of the furniture. That's how I liked it. Safe, unnoticed. But as I walked through the marble hallways that morning, carrying my bucket and rag, something felt off. I noticed papers stacked on the desk in the Millionaire's office. The edges crisp, the ink still fresh. My stomach twisted. There was something about them, something I couldn't explain. I moved quietly, pretending to sweep the hallway, but my eyes kept darting to the door. I could hear voices behind it, low and serious, discussing deals and numbers, promises and profits. I didn't catch everything, just fragments. But I knew enough to feel that gnawing worry deep inside me. My hands shook slightly as I tried to focus on cleaning, but I couldn't. Every polished surface, every shiny doorknob, felt like a reminder that I was trapped in a world where no one listened to people like me. And yet, that morning, I felt this strange pull inside me, a voice telling me that this time, I couldn't stay silent. When I finally gathered the courage, I stepped toward the office door. Each step felt louder than the last, my heart hammering in my chest. I paused just outside, wiping my sweaty hands on my apron. The millionaire was sitting at his desk, the papers spread out in front of him, his fingers drumming impatiently. I swallowed hard. Could I really do this? Could I really speak up? What could a cleaning lady possibly say that would matter to someone like him? I leaned in, my voice trembling, but quiet, careful. "Don't sign this." The words barely left my lips, but the silence that followed was deafening. He froze, eyes wide, searching mine like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. My breath caught in my throat. I expected anger, dismissal, maybe even a laugh, but he just stared. Then his assistant peeked in, frowning. He sensed something unusual, tension he didn't understand. My stomach tightened. I had put myself out there. What if I had made a mistake? What if speaking up ruined everything for me, for him, for anyone? But before I could turn back, the millionaire's eyes met mine again. He leaned back, fingers still hovering over the papers, and I realized in that moment that my words, my tiny voice, had weight. I watched as he considered, weighing the decision like it could crush or save lives. I felt every second stretch, my chest tight, my mind racing. This wasn't just about a contract. It was about right and wrong, fairness and greed, courage and fear. And somehow, I had become part of it. I, who had always faded into the background, who had never been heard, was now the one holding a spark that could ignite change. I stepped back slightly, afraid he might turn on me, afraid that I had overstepped. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he set down the pen. Silence filled the room, thick and electric. Relief surged through me, but so did disbelief. Did this really happen? Had my warning actually mattered? The assistant frowned, murmuring something under his breath, but the millionaire held firm. In that moment, I realized something I had never truly believed before. Courage, even from the smallest voice, can make a difference. But the relief was brief. The mansion didn't feel safe. The papers, the decision, the tension, they all seemed to linger in the air. I knew this was just the beginning. My small act had triggered something bigger than myself. I could feel it in the looks exchanged between staff, in the way even the millionaire seemed different, as if seeing the world in a slightly new light. I wanted to understand the weight of what I'd done, to fully grasp the ripple I had caused. But the fear and hope were tangled together, impossible to separate. As I finished my work that day, scrubbing floors and dusting shelves with hands that shook from adrenaline, I kept glancing toward his office. I had done something extraordinary, or maybe terrifying. And I had no idea what would happen next. Would this change him forever? Would it change me? Or would the world go back to ignoring people like me, pretending nothing happened? Every step I took through the mansion that evening felt different, heavier and lighter at the same time. I knew one thing for sure. My life, the quiet, invisible life I had always known, had just been shattered and rebuilt by a single whisper. And I would never be the same again. After that day, nothing felt ordinary anymore. I returned to my tiny apartment, the streets quiet, as if the city itself had noticed something had shifted. My hands still shook from the adrenaline, and my mind refused to stop replaying the moment I whispered those words. Don't sign this. Every time I thought about it, my heart raced again. It felt surreal, like a dream I didn't want to wake up from, but at the same time, every sound, every shadow reminded me it had really happened. The next morning, I walked back to the mansion, trying to act normal. But nothing was normal. Even the air felt different, thick with tension. The staff moved around me quietly, glances exchanged like they were trying to understand what had changed. I felt eyes on me constantly, some curious, some suspicious, and some judgmental. I had crossed a line, and the world noticed. I had always been invisible, and now I was painfully visible. I kept cleaning, pretending I hadn't noticed the subtle changes. The assistant avoided my gaze, muttering orders under his breath, while the millionaire seemed unsettled. There was a weight in the room I couldn't ignore. Like every decision, every glance was a ripple of the moment I had dared to speak. My mind raced, wondering if I had done the right thing. What if my warning had caused problems no one was talking about? What if it backfired? Days passed, but the tension didn't fade. I overheard whispers in the hallways, words like unexpected, courage, unbelievable. Some staff were quietly praising me, while others seemed angry or confused. I realized quickly that I had become part of a story far bigger than myself. And the millionaire, he was different too. He no longer brushed past me without notice. He observed, calculated, and sometimes just stared into the distance, as if wrestling with something inside. Then came the moment that truly tested me. Was carrying a stack of freshly polished dishes when I noticed the assistant approaching, his expression dark. He stopped me, voice low and sharp. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he asked. My stomach dropped. I nodded, too afraid to speak, hoping I hadn't misread the situation. He sighed, a mixture of frustration and disbelief. "Some people shouldn't interfere. Some decisions aren't yours to make." I wanted to explain, to say that it was about fairness, about stopping something terrible, but I stayed quiet. My heart pounded, my palms slick with sweat. That night, I lay in my small bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment. The fear of retaliation, of losing my job, of being shunned, mixed with a strange, glowing sense of pride. I realized that courage isn't a comfortable feeling. It's messy, terrifying, and sometimes isolating. I was exhausted, but I couldn't sleep, because my mind kept drifting back to the papers, the contract, the choice that could have destroyed so much. A week later, the mansion was unusually quiet. The millionaire called a meeting, and for the first time, I was included. Not formally, of course, but indirectly. He spoke to the staff, his tone measured but firm, referencing the contract, the decisions, and the importance of integrity. I listened from the shadows, heart hammering, realizing that my small action had rippled outward in ways I couldn't have imagined. People were paying attention now. My voice, my tiny whispered warning, had mattered. Even with the relief, I knew the world hadn't changed. The mansion, the staff, the millionaire, they were just a small piece of a bigger picture. Outside, in the city, countless voices remained unheard, countless injustices unchallenged. I felt the weight of that truth pressing down on me, a reminder that courage is a constant struggle, not a one-time act. And yet, despite the fear, despite the tension, I knew that speaking up was worth it. The weeks that followed were a mix of subtle victories and quiet fear. Some staff members avoided me, unsure whether to support or distrust me. Others quietly nodded in recognition, silently thanking me for the courage I had shown. And the millionaire. He changed too, in small, almost imperceptible ways. He asked questions he hadn't before, listened when others spoke, paused when making decisions. I saw glimpses of respect, not just for me, but for the truth. I couldn't tell anyone how proud I felt, because pride was dangerous in my position. But I carried it quietly, like a hidden flame that refused to die. And every time I thought about that day, every time I replayed my whisper, "Don't sign this," I felt that same surge of adrenaline, the reminder that even the smallest voice can shake the foundation of power. But the tension never fully left me. I knew that change was fragile, that one wrong step could erase everything. The fear was constant, like a shadow following me down the polished halls. Yet, mixed with that fear, there was hope. Hope that my action had planted a seed, not just in the mansion, but maybe in others who would see that courage isn't about size, wealth, or status. It's about standing up when it matters, even when the world tells you to stay quiet. And so, I continued my work, cleaning, observing, listening, and learning. Each day was a test of resolve, a reminder of the ripple I had set in motion. I knew that bigger challenges lay ahead, that the choices I had made were only the beginning of a story far larger than myself. But for the first time in my life, I felt that my voice had power, that my small act had the potential to make a real difference. I still don't know what the future holds, but I know one thing with certainty. Courage, no matter how small, can be the spark that changes everything. And sometimes, the world only needs one person brave, enough to whisper the truth. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion felt different than ever. I walked its halls like I was both invisible and impossible to ignore. Every glance from the staff, every subtle movement from the millionaire, reminded me that nothing would ever be the same. My whisper had sparked something, but it also carried consequences I couldn't yet see. One morning, as I was dusting the tall shelves in the main hall, I overheard the assistant talking in low, tense tones to another staff member. "She shouldn't have said anything," he muttered, eyes darting toward me. It could ruin everything. My stomach tightened. Could it really be that speaking the truth might put me in danger? I felt a cold shiver creep down my spine, the weight of fear pressing on my chest. I tried to focus on my work, scrubbing floors and polishing silver, but every sound, every whisper, made my heart pound. I knew the stakes had grown higher than I had imagined. The contract I had warned about was no longer just a piece of paper. It had become a symbol of power, greed, and the delicate line between justice and silence. And somehow, I was in the middle of it. The millionaire called another meeting that day. I wasn't invited, of course, but I could hear the murmurs, the tension seeping through the walls. He spoke firmly, carefully, trying to assert control over a situation that had spun far beyond what he, or anyone, expected. I realized then that my whisper had shaken not only the office, but the foundations of their entire operation. And with that realization came fear. Fear that I had made a ripple too big to control. Later, I was cleaning near the office when I noticed a folder left carelessly on a desk. My curiosity got the better of me. I glanced inside, and my heart sank. There were documents outlining decisions that were cruel, unfair, and devastating if executed. Families would lose their homes. Employees could be betrayed. And it had all nearly happened because nobody had listened. Until me. I felt a wave of anger mixed with helplessness. How could one person, one invisible maid, be the only one standing between disaster and ruin? My thoughts were interrupted when the millionaire stepped out of his office. He saw me and paused, eyes searching mine. There was a question in his gaze, a silent acknowledgement of what I had done. But then he glanced toward his assistant, who gave a subtle shake of his head. The tension between them was palpable, and I realized I was witnessing a power struggle I could barely understand. And yet, it revolved around me. Me, the girl who had just whispered, "Don't sign this." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the day. Fear twisted through me like a knife. I imagined the worst. Being blamed, being fired, or even worse, being ignored again while disaster struck. And yet, beneath the fear, there was an ember of determination, a stubborn refusal to let silence win. I knew I couldn't step back now. The next morning brought another test. A heated discussion broke out in the office. I overheard sharp voices, accusations flying, and the millionaire's voice rising, not angrily, but with a weight that demanded attention. Decisions were being questioned, choices reconsidered, and amidst it all, I felt the invisible pressure of every life that hung in the balance. Every small act of courage I had taken seemed to push them closer to fairness, closer to integrity, but also closer to conflict. By midday, the mansion was tense, the kind of tension that makes every step echo, every glance feel like scrutiny. I continued cleaning, hands trembling slightly, heart pounding. I couldn't see what the outcome would be, and that uncertainty was almost unbearable. But I realized something important. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. Courage was acting despite fear. And I had already acted once. I could act again if needed. Later, the millionaire finally made a decisive move. I watched from a distance, heart in my throat. He overturned the unfair decisions, cancelled the destructive contract, and made a choice that would protect countless people. Relief surged through me, but it was quickly tempered by exhaustion and disbelief. I had witnessed something extraordinary, The power of one small voice in a world that often ignores the quiet and vulnerable. Even as calm returned to the mansion, I knew the story didn't end here. The struggle between justice and indifference, fairness and greed, continued around us. And I knew that the ripple I had created would continue to spread. People would talk, remember, and maybe, just maybe, act differently because of what I had done. As I scrubbed the final floors that evening, I thought about all the invisible voices out there. People like me who work quietly, unnoticed, yet carry the potential to make a difference. My actions were small, but their impact was enormous. I had learned that the courage to speak up, even once, could ignite change in ways no one expected. And even though I was tired, fearful, and unsure of what the next day would bring, I felt something I had never felt before. Hope. Hope that one person could matter. Hope that even the powerless could influence the powerful. Hope that sometimes, whispering the truth is louder than the noise of the world. I never imagined fear could feel like this. The mansion, which had always seemed like just a place of work, now felt like a battlefield. Every footstep echoed with tension. Every glance felt loaded with unspoken questions. I could feel the weight of what I had done pressing down on me, heavy and inescapable. The whisper that had seemed small, almost insignificant, had grown into a force I couldn't control. That morning, I noticed the assistant pacing in front of the office, his jaw tight, eyes darting around. He muttered under his breath, calling out to others in sharp-clipped tones. I tried to act like I was cleaning, pretending to focus on the floors, but my hands shook so badly that I nearly dropped a bucket. I realized, with a pang of fear, that my voice had caused ripples far beyond what I had expected. People were watching, judging, waiting. And in that waiting, I felt exposed, vulnerable. Then, the millionaire emerged from his office, papers clutched in his hand. He looked different. Not angry, not dismissive, but serious, burdened, as if carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between ambition, power, and the faint glimmer of conscience. And then he spoke, his voice firm but calm, cutting through the tension like a blade. This contract, it stops here. Silence followed. The assistant froze, eyes wide, mouth opening and closing like he couldn't process the words. Other staff members glanced at each other, their expressions unreadable, their whispers halting mid-sentence. I stood frozen too, heart hammering, unsure whether to feel relief or terror. This decision, this moment, was more than just a rejection of a contract. It was a defiance of the world's expectations, a challenge to the structures that told me my voice didn't matter. But the storm wasn't over. The assistant stepped forward, anger in his eyes, voice sharp and accusing. Do you realize what this could cost us? The opportunity, the profits, the leverage. My chest tightened, a cold fear rising like ice. I had known this wouldn't be easy, but watching the confrontation unfold in real time was more intense than I could have imagined. The power struggle wasn't just about money or contracts. It was about authority, control, and the right to speak truth in a world that often silences the powerless. I felt my hands clench at my sides. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could do was watch as the millionaire held firm, unwavering, refusing to bend under pressure, refusing to allow injustice to prevail. My mind raced. Did I really cause this? Could one whisper from a cleaning lady actually change this? The thought was overwhelming, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. Then the assistant slammed his hand on the desk, eyes blazing. You're making a mistake. he shouted. The sound echoed through the hall, sharp and threatening. My stomach lurched. Fear gripped me like a vice. I wanted to shrink, to hide, to become invisible again, but I couldn't. Not now. I had already stepped forward once. I had already risked everything. And in that risk, I had discovered something powerful. My voice mattered. The millionaire's gaze shifted to me for the first time, sharp and piercing. There was a moment, a pause that felt eternal, where I thought he might dismiss me, ignore me, send me away as if I were nothing. But then, slowly, he nodded. Not a big gesture, just a slight tilt of the head. But in it, I could feel recognition, respect, and even gratitude. My heart skipped a beat. He had seen me, really seen me. And then, the final moment came. He tore the contract from his hands and held it up, showing everyone in the room. "This ends now," he said firmly. The assistant froze, caught between outrage and acceptance. I felt a strange mix of relief, fear, and disbelief. It had worked. The injustice had been stopped, at least for now. And I, the invisible maid, had played a part. But even as the room slowly settled, I could feel the tension lingering, like a storm that had passed but left the air charged and unsettled. I knew this wasn't the end. Decisions like this leave ripples, consequences, and challenges that follow. But in that moment, I felt a surge of something I had never experienced before. Pride, courage, and a sense of purpose. I had dared to speak. I had dared to act. And for the first time, I believed that even someone like me could matter in a world that often ignores the small and the powerless. As I walked back to continue my work, polishing the marble floors and dusting the high shelves, I realized how fragile courage is and how necessary. One small act, one quiet voice, had shaken walls, disrupted power, and changed the course of events. I thought about all the people out there who are overlooked, silenced, and dismissed every day. And I wondered, what would happen if more of them dared to speak? I couldn't answer that yet, but I knew this. The whisper I had spoken that day, the one I thought might be meaningless, had created a moment that none of us would forget. It had changed me, the millionaire, and maybe, in some small way, the world around us. And even though fear still lingered, hope had taken root. Because sometimes, the smallest voice can roar louder than the loudest empire. After that intense day, the mansion slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but nothing felt the same. I walked through the halls, bucket in hand, polishing floors and dusting shelves, yet every step reminded me of what had happened. The fear, the adrenaline, the uncertainty, all of it lingered like a shadow, but so did a new, strange feeling. Hope. I had dared to speak, dared to act, and I had made a difference. And for someone like me, that was life-changing. The millionaire no longer ignored me, and his eyes held a quiet respect whenever they met mine. I could see it in the way he asked questions, in the pauses he took before making decisions, in the small gestures that showed he remembered the warning I had whispered. He didn't just acknowledge me, he had listened. And that listening had shifted the course of events, preventing injustice from taking its course. Staff members whispered about me in hushed tones, some with admiration, some with suspicion. I didn't mind. I knew I had stepped out of the shadows and there was no going back. It was strange, this mix of fear and pride. I was still the same girl who cleaned floors and swept corridors, yet I had discovered a power I didn't know I possessed. The ability to speak truth, even when no one expects you to. I thought about the papers, the contract, the potential consequences that had nearly happened. Families could have lost their homes. People could have suffered because nobody had noticed the injustice. And yet, one whisper had stopped it all. One quiet voice, a voice that the world would have ignored, had changed the outcome. I realized then that courage isn't about grand gestures or loud proclamations. It's about standing up when it matters most, even when the odds are against you. That night, in my small apartment, I reflected on everything. I thought about the countless people whose voices are never heard, whose warnings go unheeded, whose courage is never recognized. I realized that speaking up is risky, yes, but silence is far more dangerous. Silence allows injustice to thrive. Silence allows the powerful to act unchecked. And I had broken that silence, if only for a moment, if only in my small way. The impact of that day stretched beyond the mansion. I could see it in the subtle changes around me, the way staff treated one another, the careful attention the millionaire gave to his decisions, the unspoken lessons about integrity, fairness, and listening to those who are often ignored. It was a small ripple, yes, but even ripples can become waves. And I knew that my actions, however small, had become part of something larger. I thought about the people watching this story unfold, the ones who might feel powerless in their own lives. I wanted them to know something important. Courage isn't about strength, money, or status. It's about the choice to act, Ivis, and when fear is louder than your voice. And sometimes, one small act, one whisper, one decision, one stand, can change everything. As I drifted off to sleep, I made a silent promise to myself. I would continue to speak up, to act when needed, to use my voice for what is right, even if the world tried to ignore me, because I had learned something invaluable. The world does notice, even if it doesn't always admit it. And sometimes, the quietest person in the room can be the one who shakes the walls of power. So I leave you with this question. If your voice could make a difference, even in the smallest way, would you speak? Or would you stay silent, letting the world keep turning as it always has? I chose courage, and it changed everything. The world may be bigger than me, but courage is bigger than fear. And sometimes, that's all you need to start a revolution. Because even the smallest whisper can echo louder than a shout, and one brave act can ripple through lives in ways you never imagined. And that, I think, is how change begins.